Spinoza's metaphysics consists of one thing, substance, and its modifications, modes. Early in the Ethics, Spinoza argues that there is only one substance, which is absolutely infinite, self-caused, and eternal. He calls this substance God, or nature. In fact, he takes these two terms to be synonymous. For Spinoza, the whole of the natural universe is made of one substance, God, or, what is the same, nature, and its modifications, modes. It cannot be overemphasized how the rest of Spinoza's philosophy, his philosophy of mind, his epistemology, his psychology, his moral philosophy, his political philosophy, and his philosophy of religion, flows more or less directly from the metaphysical underpinnings of the ethics. The fundamental concepts, with which Spinoza sets forth a vision of being, illuminated by his awareness of God, may seem strange at first sight. To the question of what is, he replies, substance, its attributes and modes. Following Maimonides, Spinoza defined substance as that which is in itself and is conceived through itself, meaning that it can be understood without any reference to anything external. Being conceptually independent also means that the same thing is ontologically independent, depending on nothing else for its existence and being the cause of itself. A mode is something which cannot exist independently, but rather must do so as part of something else on which it depends, including properties, for example color, relations, such as size, and individual things. Modes can be further divided into finite and infinite ones, with the latter being evident in every finite mode. He gives the examples of motion and rest. The traditional understanding of an attribute in philosophy is similar to Spinoza's modes, though he uses that word differently. To him, an attribute is that which the intellect perceives as constituting the essence of substance, and there are possibly an infinite number of them. It is the essential nature which is attributed to reality by intellect. Spinoza defined God as a substance consisting of infinite attributes, each of which expresses eternal and infinite essence, and since no cause or reason can prevent such a being from existing, it therefore must exist. This is a form of the ontological argument, which is claimed to prove the existence of God, but Spinoza went further in stating that it showed that only God exists. Accordingly, he stated that whatever is in God, and nothing can exist or be conceived without God. This means that God is identical with the universe, an idea which he encapsulated in the phrase, God or nature, which has been interpreted by some as atheism or pantheism. God can be known either through the attribute of extension or the attribute of thought. Thought and extension represent giving complete accounts of the world in mental or physical terms. To this end he says that the mind and the body are one and the same thing, which is conceived now under the attribute of thought, now under the attribute of extension. After stating his proof for God's existence, he addresses who God is. Spinoza believed that God is the sum of the natural and physical laws of the universe, and certainly not an individual entity or creator. He attempts to prove that God is just the substance of the universe, by first stating that substances do not share attributes or essences, and then demonstrating that God is a substance with an infinite number of attributes. Thus the attributes possessed by any other substances must also be possessed by God. Therefore, God is just the sum of all the substances of the universe. God is the only substance in the universe, and everything is a part of God. This view was described by Charles Hartshorne as classical pantheism. Spinoza argues that things could not have been produced by God in any other way, or in any other order than is the case. Therefore, concepts such as freedom and chance have little meaning. This picture of Spinoza's determinism is illuminated in Ethics. The infant believes that it is by free will. that it seeks the breast. The angry boy believes that by free will, he wishes vengeance. The timid man thinks it is with free will, he seeks flight. The drunkard believes that by a free command of his mind he speaks the things which when sober he wishes he had left unsaid. All believe that they speak by a free command of the mind, whilst in truth they have no power to restrain the impulse which they have to speak. In his letter to G.H. Schawler, he wrote, "Men are conscious of their desire and unaware of the causes by which their desires are determined." He also held that knowledge of true causes of passive emotion can transform it into an active emotion, thus anticipating one of the key ideas of Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis. According to Professor Erich Schließer, Spinoza was skeptical regarding the possibility of knowledge of nature, and as a consequence, at odds with scientists like Galileo and Huygens. Though the principle of sufficient reason is most commonly associated with Gottfried Leibniz, it is arguably found in its strongest form in Spinoza's philosophy. Within the context of Spinoza's philosophical system, the principle can be understood to unify causation and explanation. What this means is that for Spinoza, questions regarding the reason why a given phenomenon is the way it is, or exists, are always answerable, and are always answerable in terms of the relevant causes. This constitutes a rejection of teleological, or final causation, except possibly in a more restricted sense for human beings. Given this, Spinoza's views regarding causality and modality begin to make much more sense. Spinoza has also been described as an Epicurean materialist, specifically in reference to his opposition to Cartesian mind-body dualism. This view was held by Epicureans before him, as they believed that atoms with their probabilistic paths were the only substance that existed fundamentally. Spinoza, however, deviated significantly from Epicureans by adhering to strict determinism, much like the Stoics before him, in contrast to the Epicurean belief in the probabilistic path of atoms, which is more in line with contemporary thought on quantum mechanics. One thing which seems, on the surface, to distinguish Spinoza's view of the emotions from both Descartes and Hume's pictures of them is that he takes the emotions to be cognitive in some important respect. Jonathan Bennett claims that Spinoza mainly saw emotions as caused by cognitions. However, he did not say this clearly enough and sometimes lost sight of it entirely. Spinoza provides several demonstrations which purport to show truths about how human emotions work. The picture presented is, according to Bennett, unflattering, colored as it is by universal egoism. Spinoza's notion of blessedness figures centrally in his ethical philosophy. Blessedness, or salvation or freedom, Spinoza thinks consists in a constant and eternal love of God, or in God's love for men. And this means, as Jonathan Bennett explains, that Spinoza wants blessedness to stand for the most elevated and desirable state one could possibly be in. Here, understanding what is meant by most elevated and desirable state requires understanding Spinoza's notion of conatus. That striving, but not necessarily with any teleological baggage, and that perfection refers not to a moral value, but to completeness. Given that individuals are identified as mere modifications of the infinite substance, it follows that no individual can ever be fully complete, i.e., perfect, or blessed. Absolute perfection is, as noted above, reserved solely for substance. Nevertheless, mere modes can attain a lesser form of blessedness, namely, that of pure understanding of oneself as one really is, i.e., as a definite modification of substance in a certain set of relationships with everything else in the universe. That this is what Spinoza has in mind can be seen at the end of the Ethics, wherein Spinoza makes two final key moves, unifying the metaphysical, epistemological, and ethical propositions he has developed over the course of the work. He links the understanding of particular things to the understanding of God, or substance, in the conatus of the mind is linked to the third kind of knowledge, intuition. From here, it is a short step to the connection of blessedness with the intellectual love of God. Spinoza was considered to be an atheist because he used the word God to signify a concept that was different from that of traditional Judeo-Christian monotheism. He expressly denies personality and consciousness to God. He has neither intelligence, feeling, nor will. He does not act according to purpose, but everything follows necessarily from his nature, according to law. Thus, Spinoza's cool, indifferent God differs from the concept of an anthropomorphic, fatherly God who cares about humanity. In 1785, Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi published a condemnation of Spinoza's pantheism, after Gotthold Lessing was thought to have confessed on his deathbed to being a Spinozist, which was the equivalent in his time of being called an atheist. Jacobi claimed that Spinoza's doctrine was pure materialism, because all nature and God are said to be nothing but extended substance. This, for Jacobi, was the result of Enlightenment rationalism, and it would finally end in absolute atheism. Moses Mendelssohn disagreed with Jacobi, saying that there is no actual difference between theism and pantheism. The issue became a major intellectual and religious concern for European civilization at the time. The attraction of Spinoza's philosophy to late 18th century Europeans was that it provided an alternative to materialism, atheism, and deism. Three of Spinoza's ideas strongly appealed to them: the unity of all that exists, the regularity of all that happens, the identity of spirit and nature. By 1879, Spinoza's pantheism was praised by many, but was considered by some to be alarming and dangerously inimical. Spinoza's God or nature provided a living, natural God, in contrast to Isaac Newton's first cause argument and the dead mechanism of Julien Offray de la Mettrie's work, Man and Machine. Coleridge and Shelley saw in Spinoza's philosophy a religion of nature. Novalis called him the God-intoxicated man. Spinoza inspired the poet Shelley to write his essay, The Necessity of Atheism. It is a widespread belief that Spinoza equated God with the material universe. He has therefore been called the prophet, and prince, and most eminent expounder of pantheism. More specifically, in a letter to Henry Oldenburg he states, "As to the view of certain people, that I identify God with nature, taken as a kind of mass, or corporeal matter, they are quite mistaken." For Spinoza, the universe, cosmos, is a mode under two attributes of thought and extension. God has infinitely many other attributes, which are not present in the world. According to German philosopher Karl Jaspers, when Spinoza wrote, Latin for God or nature, he meant God was natura naturans, nature doing what nature does. Literally, nature naturing, not natura naturata, nature already created. Literally, nature natured. Jaspers believed that Spinoza in his philosophical system did not mean to say that God and nature are interchangeable terms, but rather that God's transcendence was attested by his infinitely many attributes, and that two attributes known by humans, namely thought and extension, signified God's immanence. Even God under the attributes of thought and extension cannot be identified strictly with our world. That world is of course divisible, it has parts, but Spinoza said, no attribute of a substance can be truly conceived from which it follows that the substance can be divided, meaning that one cannot conceive an attribute in a way that leads to division of substance. He also said, a substance which is absolutely infinite is indivisible. Following this logic, our world should be considered as a mode under two attributes of thought and extension. Therefore, according to Jaspers, The pantheist formula, one and all, would apply to Spinoza only if the one preserves its transcendence, and the all were not interpreted as the totality of finite things. Marshall Gerault suggested the term panentheism, rather than pantheism, to describe Spinoza's view of the relation between God and the world. The world is not God, but it is, in a strong sense, in God. Not only do finite things have God as their cause, they cannot be conceived without God. However, American panentheist philosopher Charles Hartshorne insisted on the term classical pantheism to describe Spinoza's view. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Spinoza's God is an infinite intellect, all-knowing, and capable of loving both himself and us insofar as we are part of his perfection. And if the mark of a personal being is that it is one towards which we can entertain personal attitudes, then we should note too that Spinoza recommends the intellectual love of God as the supreme good for man. However, the matter is complex. Spinoza's God does not have free will, he does not have purposes or intentions, and he insists that neither intellect nor will pertain to the nature of God. Moreover, while we may love God, we need to remember that God is really not the kind of being who could ever love us back. He who loves God cannot strive that God should love him in return, says Spinoza. Stephen Nadler suggests that settling the question of Spinoza's atheism or pantheism depends on an analysis of attitudes. If pantheism is associated with religiosity, then he is not a pantheist, since Spinoza believes that the proper stance to take towards God is not one of reverence or religious awe, but instead one of objective study and reason, since taking the religious stance would leave one open to the possibility of error and superstition. Jung's work on himself and his patients convinced him that life has a spiritual purpose beyond material goals. The main task for people, he believed, is to discover and fulfill their deep, innate potential. Based on his study of Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Gnosticism, Taoism, and other traditions, Jung believed this journey of transformation, which he called individuation, is at the mystical heart of all religions. It is a journey to meet the self, and at the same time to meet the divine. Unlike Freud's atheistic worldview, Jung's pantheism may have led him to believe that spiritual experience was essential to well-being, as he specifically identifies individual human life with the universe as a whole. In 1959, Jung was asked by host John Freeman on the BBC interview program Face to Face whether he believed in God, to which Jung answered, "I do not need to believe. I know." Jung's ideas on religion counterbalance Freudian skepticism. Jung's idea of religion as a practical road to individuation is still treated in modern textbooks on the psychology of religion, though his ideas have been criticized. Jung recommended spirituality as a cure for alcoholism and is considered to have had an indirect role in establishing Alcoholics Anonymous. Jung once treated an American patient, Roland Hazard III, who had chronic alcoholism. After working with the patient for some time and achieving no significant progress, Jung told the man that his alcoholic condition was near to hopeless, save only the possibility of a spiritual experience. Jung noted that, occasionally, such experiences had been known to reform alcoholics when all other options had failed. Hazard took Jung's advice seriously and set about seeking a personal, spiritual experience. He returned to the United States and joined a Christian evangelical movement known as the Oxford Group. He told other alcoholics what Jung had told him about the importance of a spiritual experience. One of the alcoholics he brought into the Oxford Group was Ebby Thatcher, a longtime friend and drinking buddy of Bill Wilson, later co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thatcher told Wilson about the Oxford Group, and, through them, Wilson became aware of Hazard's experience with Jung. The influence of Jung thus indirectly found its way into the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous, the original 12-step program. The above claims are documented in the letters of Jung and Bill Wilson. Though the detail is disputed by some historians, Jung discussed an Oxford group member, who may have been the same person, in talks given around 1940. The remarks were distributed privately in transcript form, from shorthand taken by an attender. Jung reportedly approved the transcript, and later recorded in his collected works. For instance, when a member of the Oxford group comes to me in order to get treatment, I say, "You are in the Oxford group. So long as you are there, you settle your affair with the Oxford group. I can't do it better than Jesus." Jung goes on to state he has seen similar cures among Roman Catholics. The 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous has a psychological backdrop, involving the human ego and dichotomy between the conscious and unconscious mind. In his inquiries into the paranormal, Jung had an apparent interest in the paranormal and occult. For decades he attended seances and claimed to have witnessed parapsychic phenomena. Initially, he attributed these to psychological causes, even delivering a 1919 lecture in England for the Society for Psychical Research on the psychological foundations for the belief in spirits. However, he began to doubt whether an exclusively psychological approach can do justice to the phenomena in question, and stated that the spirit hypothesis yields better results. But he retained some skepticism toward his own postulation, as he could not find material evidence of the existence of spirits. Jung's ideas about the paranormal culminated in synchronicity. This is the idea that certain coincidences manifest in the world have exceptionally intense meaning to observers. Such coincidences have great effect on the observer from multiple cumulative aspects. From the immediate personal relevance of the coincidence to the observer, from the peculiarities of, the nature of, the character, novelty, curiosity of any such coincidence, from the sheer improbability of the coincidence, having no apparent causal link, hence Jung's essay subtitle, and a causal connecting principle. Despite his own experiments failing to confirm the phenomenon, he held on to the idea as an explanation for apparent ESP. In addition, he proposed it as a functional explanation for how the I Ching worked, although he was never clear about how synchronicity worked. In his interpretation of quantum mechanics, Jung influenced one philosophical interpretation, not the science, of quantum physics, with the concept of synchronicity regarding some events as non-causal. That idea influenced the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, with whom, via letter correspondence, Jung developed the notion of unus mundus in connection with the notion of non-locality, and some other physicists. Synchronicity is a concept first introduced by analytical psychologist Carl G. Jung to describe circumstances that appear meaningfully related yet lack a causal connection. In contemporary research, synchronicity experiences refer to one's subjective experience that coincidences between events in one's mind and the outside world may be causally unrelated to each other yet have some other unknown connection. Jung held that this was a healthy, even necessary, function of the human mind that can become harmful within psychosis. Jung developed the theory of synchronicity as a hypothetical non-causal principle serving as the intersubjective, or philosophically objective connection between these seemingly meaningful coincidences. Mainstream science generally regards that any such hypothetical principle either does not exist or falls outside the bounds of science. After first coining the term in the late 1920s or early 30s, Jung further developed the concept in collaboration with physicist and Nobel laureate Wolfgang Pauli through long correspondences, and in their eventual 1952 work The Interpretation of Nature. and the psyche, which comprises one paper from each of the two thinkers. Their work together culminated in what is now called the Pauli-Jung conjecture. During his career, Jung furnished several different definitions of synchronicity, defining it as a hypothetical factor equal in rank to causality, as a principle of explanation, and a causal connecting principle, a causal parallelism, and as the meaningful coincidence of two or more events where something other than the probability of chance is involved. In Pauli's words, synchronicities were corrections to chance fluctuations by meaningful and purposeful coincidences of causally unconnected events, though he had also proposed to move the concept away from coincidence towards instead a correspondence, connection, or constellation of discrete factors. Jung and Pauli's view was that, just as causal connections can provide a meaningful understanding of the psyche and the world, so too may causal connections. A 2016 study found that 2/3 of therapists surveyed agreed that synchronicity experiences could be useful for therapy. Analytical psychologists likewise hold that individuals must come to understand the compensatory meaning of these experiences in order to enhance consciousness rather than merely build up superstitiousness. However, clients who disclose synchronicity experiences in a clinical setting often report not being listened to, accepted, or understood. Furthermore, the experiencing of an overabundance of meaningful coincidences is characteristic of the earliest stages of schizophrenic delusion. M.K. Johansson and M. Osman write that prevalent among many scientists, particularly psychologists studying coincidences, is the view that the occurrence of coincidences, as psychologically experienced, is induced by noisy chance occurrences out in the world which are then misconstrued via irrational cognitive biases into unfounded, possibly even paranormal, beliefs in the mind. One study has shown that both counselors and psychoanalysts were less likely than psychologists to agree that chance coincidence was an adequate explanation for synchronicity, while more likely than psychologists to agree that a need for unconscious material to be expressed could be an explanation for synchronicity experiences in the clinical setting. Jung used the concept of synchronicity in arguing for the existence of the paranormal. This idea was similarly explored by writer Arthur Kiesler in his 1972 work The Roots of Coincidence, and was also taken up by the New Age movement. Unlike magical thinking, which believes causally unrelated events to have some paranormal causal connection, the synchronicity principle supposes that events may truly be causally unrelated yet have some unknown non-causal connection. The objection from a scientific standpoint, however, is that this is neither testable nor falsifiable, and therefore does not fall within the realm of empirical study, and scientific skepticism regards it as pseudoscience. Jung stated that synchronicity events are nothing but chance occurrences from a statistical point of view, but are meaningful in that they may seem to validate paranormal ideas. However, no empirical studies of synchronicity experiences based on observable mental states and scientific data were conducted by Jung in order to draw his conclusions, though some studies have since been done in this area. While a given observer may subjectively experience a coincidence as meaningful, this alone cannot prove any objective meaning to the coincidence. Various statistical laws, such as Littlewood's law and the law of truly large numbers, or basic properties of probability, as Poisson clumping, show how unexpected occurrences can be inevitable or more likely to encounter than people otherwise assume. These serve to explain coincidences, such as synchronicity experiences, as chance events, which have been misinterpreted by confirmation biases, spurious correlations, or underestimated probability. For most of his adult life, Bertrand Russell maintained that religion is little more than superstition, and despite any positive effects that religion might have, it is largely harmful to people. He believed religion and the religious outlook. He considered communism and other systematic ideologies to be forms of religion, serve to impede knowledge, foster fear and dependency, and are responsible for much of the war, oppression and misery that have beset the world. In his 1949 speech, "Am I an atheist or an agnostic?" Russell expressed his difficulty over whether to call himself an atheist or an agnostic. As a philosopher, if I was speaking to a purely philosophic audience, I should say that I ought to describe myself as an agnostic, because I do not think that there is a conclusive argument by which one can prove that there is not a God. On the other hand, if I am to convey the right impression to the ordinary man in the street, I think that I ought to say that I am an atheist, because, when I say that I cannot prove that there is not a God, I ought to add equally that I cannot prove that there are not the Homeric gods. In the 1948 BBC radio debate between Bertrand Russell and Frederick Copleston, Russell chose to assume the position of the agnostic. It seems to have been because he admitted to not being able to prove the non-existence of God. Copleston, "Well, my position is the affirmative position that such a being actually exists, and that his existence can be proved philosophically." Perhaps you would tell me if your position is that of agnosticism or of atheism. I mean, would you say that the non-existence of God can be proved? Russell, "No, I should not say that. My position is agnostic." Though he would later question God's existence, he fully accepted the ontological argument during his undergraduate years. For 2 or 3 years, I was a Hegelian. I remember the exact moment, during my 4th year, in 1894, when I became one. I had gone out to buy a tin of tobacco, and was going back with it along Trinity Lane, when I suddenly threw it up in the air and exclaimed, "Great God in boots." The ontological argument is sound. This quote has been used by many theologians over the years, such as by Louis Podgman in his Philosophy of Religion, who wish for readers to believe that even a well-known atheist philosopher supported this particular argument for God's existence. However, elsewhere in his autobiography, Russell also mentions, "About 2 years later, I became convinced that there is no life after death, but I still believed in God, because the first cause argument appeared to be irrefutable." At the age of 18, however, shortly before I went to Cambridge, I read Mill's autobiography, where I found a sentence to the effect that his father taught him the question, "Who made me?" cannot be answered, since it immediately suggests the further question, "Who made God?" This led me to abandon the first cause argument and to become an atheist. Russell made an influential analysis of the omphalos hypothesis enunciated by Philip Henry Goss, that any argument suggesting that the world was created as if it were already in motion could just as easily make it a few minutes old as a few thousand years. There is no logical impossibility in the hypothesis that the world sprang into being 5 minutes ago, exactly as it then was, with a population that remembered a wholly unreal past. There is no logically necessary connection between events at different times. Therefore, nothing that is happening now, or will happen in the future, can disprove the hypothesis that the world began 5 minutes ago. As a young man, Russell had a decidedly religious bent, himself, as is evident in his early Platonism. He longed for eternal truths, as he makes clear in his famous essay, A Free Man's Worship, widely regarded as a masterpiece of prose, but a work that Russell came to dislike. While he rejected the supernatural, he freely admitted that he yearned for a deeper meaning to life. Russell's views on religion can be found in his book, Why I Am Not a Christian, and other essays on religion and related subjects. Its title essay was a talk given on the 6th of March, 1927 at Battersea Town Hall, under the auspices of the South London branch of the National Secular Society, UK, and published later that year as a pamphlet. The book also contains other essays in which Russell considers a number of logical arguments for the existence of God, including the first cause argument, the natural law argument, the argument from design, and moral arguments. He also discusses specifics about Christian theology. Religion is based, I think, primarily and mainly upon fear. It is partly the terror of the unknown and partly, as I have said, the wish to feel that you have a kind of elder brother who will stand by you in all your troubles and disputes. A good world needs knowledge, kindliness, and courage. It does not need a regretful hankering after the past, or a fettering of the free intelligence by the words uttered long ago by ignorant men. The metaphysical considerations proceed from God to the substantial world and back to the spiritual realm. The starting point for the work is the conception of God as an absolutely perfect being, that God is good, but goodness exists independently of God, a rejection of divine command theory, and that God has created the world in an ordered and perfect fashion. At the time of its writing, Discourse made the controversial claim that the opinions of scholastic philosophers are not to be wholly despised. Early work in modern philosophy during the 17th century were based on a rejection of many of the precepts of medieval philosophy. Leibniz saw the failures of scholasticism merely as one of rigor. If some careful and meditative mind were to take the trouble to clarify and direct their thoughts in the manner of analytic geometers, he would find a great treasure of important truths, wholly demonstrable. Leibniz claimed that God's omnipotence was in no way impugned by the thought of evil, but was rather solidified. He endorsed the view that God chose the best of all possible worlds. In other words, Leibniz believed this world, or reality, to be the best there possibly could be. Taking all facts into account, no better world could be imagined, even if we believed that we could think of something more perfect. In discussing the New Age, academics have varyingly referred to New Age spirituality and New Age religion. Those involved in the New Age rarely consider it to be religion, negatively associating that term solely with organized religion, and instead describe their practices as spirituality. Religious studies scholars, however, have repeatedly referred to the New Age milieu as a religion. York described the New Age as a new religious movement, NIM. Conversely, both Helas and Sutcliffe rejected this categorization. Helas believed that while elements of the New Age represented NIMs, this did not apply to every New Age group. Similarly, Chrysides stated that the New Age could not be seen as the religion in itself. The New Age is also a form of Western esotericism. Hanegraaff regarded the New Age as a form of popular culture criticism, in that it represented a reaction against the dominant Western values of Judeo-Christian religion and rationalism, adding that New Age religion formulates such criticism not at random, but falls back on the ideas of earlier Western esoteric groups. The New Age has also been identified by various scholars of religion as part of the cultic milieu. This concept, developed by the sociologist Colin Campbell, refers to a social network of marginalized ideas. Through their shared marginalization within a given society, these disparate ideas interact and create new syntheses. Hammer identified much of the New Age as corresponding to the concept of folk religions, in that it seeks to deal with existential questions regarding subjects like death and disease in an unsystematic fashion, often through a process of bricklage from already available narratives and rituals. York also heuristically divides the New Age into three broad trends. The first, the social camp, represents groups that primarily seek to bring about social change, while the second, the occult camp, instead focus on contact with spirit entities and channeling. York's third group, the spiritual camp, represents a middle ground between these two camps that focuses largely on individual development. You know, Christianity is right. Not in the exoteric sense, but in the esoteric sense, i.e., find your gift from Jesus. Utilize it at the workplace for God's glory. Live by the gospel, or any other comparative teachings, and the Holy Spirit will flow through you. And when one dies, one lifts out of the cycle of the spirit and the flesh by merging the two, thus creating one soul, which is the embodiment of the spirit, and the flesh. Then at death one's thoughts become a door where one creates, and then enters eternal matter, joining all the other souls that share one's ethos. That together they all work, rest, and play within the supernal eternal infinite shores that is nothing less than our Creator's peak potential, and or the realization of the spiritual utopian existence, simply known as heaven or eternal matter. God is a DJ. At a local club, a DJ is playing a record upon a player, and the record that he is playing has grooves that bear no sound until it picks up some flick as the record spins. Then as the flick builds up from the dirty record as it spins, the music begins to play, and everyone in the audience dances and sings along with the tune. On a subjective level, it could be seen as a developmental cause of one's personality, as one moves through the experiences of one's life, i.e., the personality as a collection of habits and assumptions that work within the conventional framework of both evolution and the space-time continuum. And when seen collectively throughout culture that has marched through the eons of time, picking at fluff that create melodies in the form of a plethora of conceptual frameworks that play the songs that everybody dances to on the dance floor at the club of which they are told is reality. Everything we know, it's naught but fluff on life's record. Everything that we believe that forms our reality and our place in the world is culture's fluff. The way that we are living, we can clean the needle and the record and let God and nature call the tune. The bondsman does not have to be objectified by the lords, because we are subjects unto ourselves, as well as being others that together are caught within the spin, as together we weave the wheel of Geist's wheel in the tapestry of time. And it's time for the lion to lay with the lamb. We can change the way that we are living, because we have it in us to do so. Money will have no value on a world devoid of spirit. So we should not spend our planet on a few smokes and a pint whilst listening to the music at the club. Go over to the DJ and ask him to play an alternative song, one that is equal and available to all. Spirit is within everything and it's aware. The particles that make up our cells that form our bodies form our particle consciousness. The fluff in our personal record is created by the correlation of the two selves, for when one connects, through meditation, contemplation, and intuition, the existence of this infinitely wise, although spontaneous creative awareness. And our particle consciousness, that questions and fears death, connects to God via the intuitive assumption of the afterlife, and it harmonizes and forges the soul. Which in short is the mergence of both spirit and nature, or the embodiment of the spirit and the flesh, which at death ascends the karmic cycle of birth and rebirth, as we enter eternal matter, as we leave the club to go home. The few pull the strings by subjugating the many, and I don't think God will value his name taken in vain in the Christian ethos that is associated with this, i.e., when you were born you were given a gift from Jesus. In life you must find that gift and nurture it with rehearsal and practice and performance. That being, if you are a carpenter, let your service be carpentry. And if you are a writer, become a writer, and this will bring glory to God. That glory being the Holy Spirit, and in turn, that if you hold God's ethics, and do not question the powers that be, that in the name of tradition, where the lions feed off of the lamb's vitality, and those lambs are coerced by the conditioning of the machine, who are like the dancers at the club dancing to the records that play upon the player. It is time to walk a different path, where everyone is equal and in harmony with themselves and each other and life, and all of creation, for we are in the womb of creation. And our mother and father or God and nature has created our soul, which in turn is a combination through our karmic journeys that accumulate substance, reason and wisdom to sheen our dazzling personalities, as they breathe life and existence of all things and their experiences and their collective environments into eternity, beyond the bowl and into the sink. The DJ has to play a different tune, and that tune is absolute individual freedom and collective unconditional love, peace, and harmony for everyone and everything within creation. We have come from the sink, like Plato sang, that was a collection of fluff from the groove that collected on the needle as the DJ spanned the disc in the journey of life. As the DJ played the tracks that mesmerized the crowds throughout the eons like snake charmers, as the few fed of the many and called it tradition. However, now the club has reached a critical mass, but there is one more song to be played, and this is not a concept. It's a purification, which will be the catalyst for the coming of the new age, where science, philosophy, and spirituality will shape the path that will guide us to our true destination, where the lower and higher self unify, becoming the embodiment of heaven on earth with the formation of the soul, because as on earth as in heaven. And if you questioned this logic, then clear your mind like an empty sugar bowl and ask yourself this question: could I imagine that I am God, as is everyone and everything that is within existence, in some holographic conscious dream? And that we have it within our potential to not only be in such a place, but also be the creator of that place, which is nothing short of a pathway that leads to a spiritual utopian existence where infinite conscious entities become realized with all their trimmings, so that you can reach your creative peak potential, that being eternal matter. And if I can imagine such a palace, then why can't God? The cross is to be seen from an Aristotelian mindset. Earth, air, fire and water, which he conceived from the burning of a stick culminating in sap, ash, fire, and smoke, or vapor, declaring a materialistic reductionist view of the material world. The circle is from the ancients, where the snake swallows his own tail, which symbolizes eternity, which is signified in marriage with a wedding ring, or a band of gold with no beginning and no end. Together, they show us the way, and the reason for everything is for the ultimate infinite intelligent creative consciousness to create its ultimate creative dream, and peace, love, freedom and justice for all life is the path that individually and collectively leads to home. So DJ, please clean the needle and wipe the record with your antistatic cloth, and play the record again, as you our good God intended. And bring the house down with justice, peace, love and freedom for all, and let silence deafen the ears of the harmonious euphoric crowd. And the DJ's glory will resonate with the audience as they dance and experience all the joys of the eternal bowl, and God and all of his friends live forever within and without the confines of eternal matter.